This is Beekeeper Confidential, a show about the curious lives of bees and their beekeepers. I'm your host, Mandy Shaw. Today's guest is extraordinary for her many talents, her journey with bees, and her generous spirit. She's the owner of Zia Queenbees, based out of New Mexico, the Land of Enchantment, which is also my home state. But the most recent twist in her journey brought her to the Iberian Peninsula for the Fulbright-National Geographic Storytelling Fellowship. I'm so happy to share the first of many visits with Melanie Kirby. Let's see. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I have been so looking forward to this.
Me too.
For those of you who don't know Melanie, she was in Spain doing the National Geographic Storytellers. What would you describe it as? A project?
It was definitely a project. And it's actually the way they term it, the Fulbright titles it as a open study research project. And then, so as I applied for that, and I was very excited to first hear that I was an alternate, I was like, oh, okay, well, so when I applied, and Fulbright is actually something that I've always wanted to apply for. I mean, I've been thinking about it for, at least probably 20 years, but it just, between starting my farm, then having kids, and I didn't know, every time I would think about it, the deadline had just passed, because they do have it available for professionals to do. You don't necessarily have to be a student.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just the timing wasn't right. But then I happened to be going to Washington State University because I decided to go back to grad school. And they had an informational meeting. And I was like, that's right. I've always been interested in this. I should go. So I applied, and it literally was like, got in by the hair of my chinny chin chin, like the deadline and trying to get my letters of support. And I had all my essays done and my letters of references done, but I kept trying to reach out to a Spanish researcher. For the open study research project, you have to have a host country liaison, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Spain has some bee research centers, but this was August and everybody goes on holiday in August. So I couldn't get a hold of anybody.
No.
So it was really stressing. And then I just happened to do a Google search, and Dr. Jaime Prudencio Garcia, who's actually from Penn State University, he came up as a search, and he's an agroecologist, but also a beekeeping instructor there at Penn State. And so I reached out to him and asked him if he knew of any Spanish beekeepers or beekeeping organizations and researchers that I could connect with. And by the way, this is time sensitive, like, I need a quick turnaround. But he was great. We had a conversation. I guess he realized I wasn't as crazy probably as my email sounded. And so, he reached out to a few of his contacts in Spain. And so I ended up connecting with, they're called COAG, and it stands for, in Spanish, it's Coordinadores Organizados de Agricultura y Ganadería, which in English means Coordinated Organization of Farmers and Ranchers. And so they're a non-governmental organization, but they are also have different technicians for various sectors. So whether you're growing olives or doing, pigs, or doing wine, or doing honey, they have these various extension agents. And so I was connected with them, and they were able to sign this letter of support. So so that happened. And then I got word probably like 4 months later that I was a semifinalist. And when you're a semifinalist, then National Geographic reached out and said that semifinalists are invited to apply for what they call an enhancement award, which is a storytelling sort of component. And you get some mentorship from Nat Geo and the ability to share your experiences via their platforms. And so I thought to myself, well, shoot, I'm going to apply. Maybe this will like double my chances. And then it was interesting, because then come March, now we're, flash forward to March, that whole process started in August, as I mentioned, and now, 2018, I guess. And then now March 2019, I received an email from the Fulbright saying that I was an alternate. And I was going, oh, okay, well, if somebody backs out, then, that's me. But I came close. That's, better than nothing, because I really was surprised. I knew it was very competitive, and I hadn't gotten myself emotionally invested in it yet because I didn't want to be disappointed if I didn't get it. But then the very next day, I got an email from National Geographic saying that I was one of the finalists for that. And so I got flown to DC. And yeah, every year they pick between 1 and 5 fellows, and so they chose 4 this year, and so I'm one of 4 out of the whole group. And so the other 3 are women professionals as well. One of them is actually, she's based in Vietnam in the South Pacific. She was a surfer in San Diego, a sponsored surfer for many years, Emmy coach, and she runs something called Beyond the Surface International. And she realized that as she was surfing in all these fantastic isolated places, that a lot of these places were surrounded by small fishing villages, and they were being really outcompeted by large fishing companies.
Oh.
And so her focus now is really trying to bring awareness to just the cultural and traditional aspects, the socioeconomic impact of fishing and fishing commercially, and what that does to small scale fishing villages. And so that's her project. The another person in our group is Aaliyah Pierce, and she's a spoken word poet from New Jersey, and she is a Caribbean American. And so her project is doing spoken word throughout Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago. So she got to go down to the islands and spend her time there. And the third one is actually a young woman named Madison Robley. And Madison had been an exchange student. I believe Madison is originally from Missouri. She had been an exchange student to Nepal and really liked it and wanted to go back. So when she was an exchange student there, she was staying with a host family, and she saw one day like all these people rushing down the street after this big truck. And she asked her family, why are they all running after that truck? And they said, well, that's the water truck. It only comes every 2 weeks. And she's like, what? We have running water? And they said, yes, we do, but not everybody here does.
Wow.
And so she really was surprised to learn that there are people living in communities, and especially even larger cities, that don't have regular access to running water. And so her project is revolving around just water access in Nepal, and how innovative and sort of creative ways that community members go about trying to secure their water.
Do you get to hang out with these ladies?
I do.
Are they
I
a
do.
girl
Well,
gang?
obviously we're scattered right now, but we actually have an online meeting coming up later this week. So and we're supposed to we spent a week together in last July of 2019, getting an intensive training short course at Nat Geo in public speaking, videography, photography, various aspects of trying to put together your own little like story, or at least how you can share your story. And so that's how I got to first meet them, and they're wonderful, wonderful human beings and doing really good work. So basically, we're supposed to reunite and we each get to do a presentation on our projects for a Nat Geo Nights program. And normally they do that middle of July, and that's when the new cohort has been selected. And so then we get to kind of pass a week with the new group. And when I got to go to the training last year, I got to pass a week with the former group, which those are also fantastic individuals. I mean, we talk about them for hours too. So we'll see, because it's still supposed to happen. We just don't know if it's going to get postponed maybe to later in the fall or not. But.
What a life-changing opportunity.
Yeah, I'm still like, yeah, that happened. It's still very surreal to like own it.
And the specialized training and all of that just sounds like a dream come true.
Well, I will definitely share that I feel like it's been this dream that I've been envisioning for, multiple decades, at least 2 decades, When I first got into beekeeping, as dreaming and this vision of being able to not only make a living with my bees, but to be able to, I guess, in a sense, I mean, I don't want it to sound cliche, but it really is to sort of give back to the community that has allowed me to become who I am, right? So I'm from New Mexico. My family's from southern New Mexico, and we're a part of a Native American tribe down there called Tortugas Pueblo. And we're of mixed descent, so we're Spanish and Native American, but then also, I mean, my mother was a Peace Corps volunteer, and she met my father in the Caribbean, so I also have that flowing through my veins as well. I mean, my last name is Irish of all things. Do I really look Irish, right? But, yeah, so I'm American at this point, very much so. Just a melange of different sort of not only genetics but perspectives. And I knew that, like my mother had done Peace Corps, that was really my inspiration for wanting to give back initially. And so I decided to enlist as a Peace Corps volunteer as well, and was given the assignment of beekeeping. And that was 23 years ago. And I had no idea, really. I mean, literally, my life plan was I was going to, I graduated with my bachelor's. I'd actually studied marine biology, fisheries for a couple years in Miami. Had way too much fun. I was like a raver for a decade. I sold my turntables. And then I totally switched gears and went back to New Mexico and went to a small school called St. John's College, which does a great books program. So we read a lot of old dead people. It's a lot of philosophy and sort of history of science and the ethics and that sort of thing. And it really taught me, you learn how to learn there, because if you want to participate, it's all reading and discussion. And so you're encouraged to communicate with people. And so, of course, I love talking. And so that was like right up my alley. So I graduated from there and knew that I was going to do Peace Corps. But then my plan literally was, after Peace Corps, I was going to move to San Francisco and be a DJ. That was my life plan. And, I got beekeeping as my assignment in Peace Corps, and that just changed everything for me. So, I mean, I had no idea that it would become sort of the professional declaration in my life that it has, but it's taking me to so many interesting places. And, I've come from that. Well, I was very hyperactive as a kid. I probably would have been diagnosed with ADD, had that been more, I guess, noticeable, or at least in terms of diagnosis. But my mother just kept me very busy. So I'm always very, very active, wanting to do things. I'm a constant worrier. So if I'm not doing something, then I worry and I fret. So for my own mental health, I really try and just keep busy.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing things where I feel like I'm engaged in the community and supporting other people, it's, it's selfish to a certain extent, but then it makes me feel good. And then I feel like, okay, yeah, life is good. Like we all work together, as do all the worker bees in a hive. I consider myself just another one of them. And so, I mean, once I did Peace Corps, I did that it's a 2-year, 3-month commitment. I made a really good friend down there, one of my closest friends who I'm still in contact with, named Shimena Gall. She actually works for USAID and is living in Bangkok right now. But she grew up in Hawaii. And so her mom had come to visit when we were in Peace Corps, and her mom and I hit it off. Her mom had a very small gardenia farm and really wanted some help after Shimena and I finished our service. And so she said, if you want to come and work at my farm, you've got a place to stay. And of course, me coming from, the Southern Rockies, high desert, I was like, oh my gosh, job, Hawaii, I'm there, So I ended up going out there and worked for her for her growing season. And while I was there, I happened to learn about Kona Queen and Hawaiian Queen, and there was also Big Island Queen. And so I had no idea. Like, I really had very rustic, out in the bush. Like, I mean, I did all, when I was in Peace Corps, it was all wild swarm captures using a machete, trying not to get, bit by snakes and all those crazy things. And
a little different than urban beekeeping.
Right. And we made our own smokers out of old coffee cans. And I mean, it was very, very rustic.
Wow.
And so here it was, all of a sudden, now I'm in Hawaii, and I'm actually standing in line at the DMV behind somebody who's wearing a Kona Queen shirt. And my friend who had taken me there was like, you're a beekeeper, introduce yourself. And of course I was like, no, I'm too shy. But anyways, eventually curiosity got the better of me, and I tapped him on the back and I said, oh, I'm a beekeeper too. And then he's like, oh my gosh, my boss is always looking for more people with experience. You should call him. I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up calling the owner, which is Gus Rouse at the time. And he knew, because it's an island, of course, everybody knows everybody. So he knew Carol Christensen, my friend's mom, who had this gardenia farm. And used to have bees there and this and that. And he was like, well, just come work for me. And I said, well, no, I committed to her till, the end of her growing season. He said, okay, well, call me after. So now it's like May or something. And I call him up because I finished the gardenia growing season with my friend's mom. And he said, oh, I really don't need anybody right now.
Oh.
And so I was like, because over like it really built up like, oh my God, I'm gonna go work at like the world's largest queen rearing place. Like I knew, my sort of exposure to queen rearing, especially having been in Paraguay in South America, was just you cut the little cell out and you carefully put it over in a split. Like that's pretty much the queen rearing that I had known and experienced. And so it ended up leaving Hawaii and went to work in Mexico, of all places, in the Yucatan Peninsula, doing something non-bee related, but I did get to play with bees while I was there. I worked at a bamboo furniture making farm with 70 Mayan artisans, which was really cool.
Wow.
And I was a quality control intern. So I was basically, they had these contracts with Neiman Marcus for like bamboo soap dishes and picture frames and, garden love seats and these very interesting sort of things you can make with bamboo. And so I basically had to, change the metrics because it was coming in inches and change it into, the metric system over to centimeters and then translate that and just make sure that people understood what, making sure the whole process worked before these products got shipped back to the States. And I was there for about 6 months. And in that time, I got bumped from quality control intern to all of a sudden like general manager. And so it became a little bit more stressful, but I also just really missed the bees. And I was like, I know I need to get back with them. And so I reached out to Kona Queen again. And by now internet's going, I mean, like we're talking here, like this is early 2000, like 1999, 2000. And I spoke with them and they said, oh, okay, well, after the holidays, why don't you come on out? So I was like, okay, good. I'm going to get to go work there. So then comes January and I call and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to come out. And they're like, oh, well, we offered that job to a beekeeper named Melody from France. And I was like, wait, what? So once again, I was denied.
Oh.
And I was like, what? Oh my gosh. So I was pretty like, oh man, I got to figure out something. And I was calling New Mexico is not known for large scale honey production because we are a drier state. Mm-hmm. And so if we get rains at the right time, it can be stellar bumper crops. But if you don't get rain, it's, very dry. So I called a few different beekeepers who were in the area and, even volunteered, just saying, oh, I'm very willing to just come and volunteer. And I had one woman, actually the mother of a commercial guy, who gave me a 2-hour lecture, no exaggeration, on how I was in the wrong line of work, that this was a man's job, this was a man's industry, and that if I really if I really wanted to do bees, that possibly I should just focus more on genetics and like work in a lab. And I was like, but I like being in the field. I mean, I really had, from being in college and, high school straight to college and getting the sort of book smarts, and then all of a sudden having this rustic experience in South America, living for a couple years with peasant farmers who only had a 3rd grade education, but who were brilliant. I really had become quite enamored of field education. Like I realized that books are great, but I really want to learn from just being in the field. And so, for me, I wasn't ready to go to grad school at that time. I literally thought, no, I really want to just get back, work with bees, learn about American beekeeping and work in the field. I'm not shy to be a laborer. Like that's actually what I want to do. I want to farm. And so, I would say that conversation with that woman was not very happy, but it really lit a fire under me because I realized I was like, well, nobody's going to tell me I can't do this, And I just really was like, okay, I'm gonna try and make it work. So my good friend that I mentioned, Ximena, who's in Hawaii, she called me up and said, hey, I was driving around the island. I stopped in this little country store and there's a sign in there and they're looking for beekeepers. And I was like, what? She's like, oh yeah, they're called Hawaiian Queen. And of course I was like, well, I wanted to work for the world's largest. She's like, just call the guy and, introduce yourself. So anyways, I called him, and this owner, his name is Michel Krones, and he, very interesting man. He had grown up in he's of Austrian descent, but he had grown up in Argentina, and then he had a honey production company in Costa Rica for like 20 years. And then he had decided to move to Hawaii, and he wanted to get into queen production. So I called him up, and I told him, of course, I don't have any queen experience, but I'm familiar with working with bees. And he's like, oh, I'll fly you out. And I thought, oh, okay, here we go. So I went and worked for him for a season. And I credit him. He's the one who taught me how to graft, which is just transferring, fertilized larvae into the special cups. And he ran a really quality system. He was still figuring it out because he was newer to, even though he'd been living in Costa Rica, Hawaii has similarities, but there's a difference in some of the seasonality of things there, and his location being on the leeward side. And so I worked for him for about 6 months, and I'd kept in touch with that beekeeper that I had been in line, behind at the DMV. And so when I called him and said, oh, I'm coming back out, I'm going to work at this place. Of course, then he told Gus Rouse, and then very funny, Gus called me and was like, I thought you were going to work here. And I said, well, I tried, but you guys told me you already
there was a little mix up with the names.
Right. And funny enough, I said, how's the French beekeeper? And he said, oh, she just only wanted to hang out at the beach. She doesn't work here anymore. And I said, oh, go figure, right? No, nothing against the French, but if you're going to go all that way, you might as well go to the beach, right?
Yeah.
And so at any rate, he told me, he said, well, when you're done there, you come straight over here. And I said, are you sure? Because twice now it hasn't worked. He's all, no. When you're done there, you come straight over here. And that's a little bit was, I think, part of like island competition. Everybody knows everybody there, and they're all in competition with each other. So funny enough, and Michel he produced about 35,000 queens a year, and then he would shut down for part of the year. And so once he shut down, then I switched over to Kona Queen, and then I was there for about 5 years. And Kona Queen, in comparison, 35,000 sounds like a lot, which it is. But Kona Queen was doing 250,000 queens a year. So it was, I jumped into the frying pan. But I really enjoyed working there in terms of, I worked with beekeepers from all over the world. There were beekeepers that would, from the Southern Hemisphere that would come up there when it was their winter. And so I worked with Chileans, French beekeepers, Scottish beekeepers, Kiwi beekeepers, New Zealanders, Canadians. There were a fair amount of Canadians that would come and work there. And then a few also as well that would come from the northern states like North Dakota and, Montana and stuff for the wintertime. So I learned a lot, and I really got good at grafting. I used to graft every morning with this one woman, a Hawaiian woman named Heidi, who she blew me out of the water. I would graft 1 to every 3 that she would graft. She was so fast. But we grafted about 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, for every day, every week of the year, except for probably a few days over Christmas. So I got pretty good at that, and that was just from practice. But I loved being in the field, and so at that point in time, I was the only female on the field crew, because Heidi, after she would graft, would then go into the Quonset hut and just start making cages, making the fondant to build cages and preparing all of that. And then the only other woman on staff was Nancy, who was the office manager. And so Nancy Esco, who recently retired from there. She was originally from Alabama, such a sweetheart. And so she ran the office, and then I was the only other female on the crew. And so after grafting in the morning, then I would catch a ride with the guy who maintained the breeder colonies, and we would go catch up with what you called the catching crew, and we'd catch queens for the rest of the day. They had 15 yards of 1,500 newts, so every day we were catching 1,500 queens, thereabouts. And then, after the 15th day, you'd start the rotation again. We did a bunch of pollen patties, and I literally went from a very rustic experience, in the bush, to all of a sudden,
I wonder, when you're working with that many colonies and you have a strict schedule of what you have to do with them, and you're doing it day after day after day, do you ever lose some of the magic that you feel when you're working with the bees? Like, do you get into a special place with them when you're on that like level of task?
I would say for me as just an employee, it was still very magical because every day I got to play with bees. Every day I was going out there and like, looking at hives, trying to find the queen. We'd have little competitions amongst us, like who could catch the most in a certain amount of time. And Gus was a really smart businessman. I mean, he incentivized our catching. So you wanted to leave the mating nuke in the best possible shape because immediately after catching, we'd put another batch of cells in that were very ripe that were going to emerge. And so for every percentage point above, I think it was 75%, like so for the whole yard, say there's 1,500, and then say we would catch, 80% of that. For every percentage point above 75, we would get a $10 bonus. So you get 50 extra bucks every, and that's just from one bee yard. So if you're doing 15, I mean, you could get several hundred extra bucks per pay period. So it made us really want to do it well. Mm-hmm. And we had a crew of about 19. And yeah, there was also the bounce crew that I would go with sometimes, which those were the guys who would go out and, borrow bees from the support colonies, basically shaking extras out to mm-hmm. bring back to add to the mating nukes that were low population. But yeah, it was definitely a taste of factory farming, which for me just blew my mind. I was very impressed with how coordinated they managed everything and had stuff sort of parceled out and scheduled and delegated so that everything got done. That was very impressive. But I also knew very much in the back of my mind that whenever I had my own bees, that's not how I was going to do it. Mm-hmm. Like I had, mm-hmm. and not that they were doing it in a bad way, I would say, but their focus definitely was, on quantity. They needed to get a lot of queens out. And it wasn't until, I worked for Gus for 5 years and then left. I ended up working for another beekeeper in Florida, actually for 3 years, and then sporadically off and on, who was a migratory operator between Florida and Wisconsin. That's Gary Oreskovich. And Gary was extremely conscientious beekeeper, still is. I mean, he's like 50 some years now in the business. He saw and milled all his own wood for all of his colonies. I mean, he was extremely conscientious. And so I saw that you could be a commercial beekeeper and implement more mindful management practices. Mm-hmm. And so most of my system is modeled off of what I learned from working for Gary in Florida. And and then so worked for him for 3 years and then learned how to do package production there. We still did queens. And then we also did comb honey, orange blossom, and clover comb honey. Once you take them up to Wisconsin, we do the clover. Yeah, and it was that's where I met my farm partner, Mark. And so when we teamed up, and Mark's from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so he had been running his 50 hives for honey production at that time. Superior Honey Farms was the name of his little company, and all his honey got sold to the local co-op. And I actually had plans to go work in New Zealand after working in Florida, and somehow I chose Michigan instead of New Zealand. Go figure. But it worked out good. I mean, we teamed up, and so Mark had been doing honey production, and I had the queen rearing skills, so we decided to double his numbers. And for some reason, I thought, well, let's leave, half in Michigan and take half to New Mexico. I really wanted to get back to my own home state, but I'd never kept bees in my state. I mean, I recognized a few of the plants, but I couldn't tell you when things bloomed. I mean, because I hadn't beekeeped here at all. And so he and I learned that together. And over time, we ended up just staying longer and longer in New Mexico just because it has more sunshine. And but it was when I became my own sort of co-owner and operator of my own farm that then I gained a whole new level of respect for my previous employers, because I realized how much motorcycle going by. I gained a whole new level of respect for my employers, because I realized that, apart from them working with bees, which is already a sort of niche industry, yes, they wanted to make money, but they weren't billionaires by any means, and they were doing it because they loved it, because there's a lot of other things you could do besides even commercial beekeeping that are going to could make you money, right? But I also realized too that Gus felt a real responsibility. I mean, he had beekeepers from all over the world relying on him for queens. And, I don't even know how he slept at night. I mean, here it was, I only produced, at the height of my production, was 3,000 queens a year, and I was losing sleep at night. So I can only imagine when you're producing 250,000 or even 35,000, and you've got, 2 dozen employees, that you're keeping on payroll, and you're trying to provide them with, health insurance and retirement opportunities and things like that. So I gained a whole new level of respect for them. Still to this day, like some of my best memories are from working at those places. And it really helped me to sort of glean the best from each place and learn, what to avoid in terms of some of the more, sort of negative situations that I encountered there, and then to utilize the good things I learned to build my own situation. And yeah, so that's kind of what brought me to my Zia Queenbees farm, which we established in 2005. And so this year is the 15-year anniversary of the farm.
Congratulations.
Which is pretty exciting. And it's a miracle I'm just not full of white hair or bald at this point from all the stress. But we stayed small, one, due to choice, and then also circumstance. We built, Mark didn't come from a farming background. I definitely did not either. And so we built everything out of pocket. And, with beekeeping, some years are good, some are bad. We had our worst year in 2011 because there was a huge fire in Los Alamos, which we don't even have bees in Los Alamos, but it's called the Las Conchas fire, and it just burned, I don't know how many thousand acres. Well, all that smoke drifted. I was actually pregnant with my son at the time. I had to go downstate for 2 weeks to my mother's because the smoke was so bad. And we had this whole contingency plan, like, oh my gosh, what are there spot fires? Like, I'll take the kids and the chickens and you handle the bees. And, it was really kind of scary. But that year, we lost 40% to bears in August. And it was a big wake-up call because we've always had some mountain yards which have fencing on them, but we also knew, well, the bears only come down for apples starting in September, so we'll just move them back down to the valley. And we were living in the northern Rio Grande Valley at that time. And that year, the vegetation got wiped out. And so we had kept all of our hives in the valley because the mountains were seemingly dry that year, and at least people were still irrigating for alfalfa down in the valley. And we didn't use barefoot seed because we were spoiled. We had never had an issue. And because of that vegetation getting wiped out, the bears came down early. And we had 12 different yards just hit. Boom, boom, boom. So lost some really precious breeders, lost over $10,000 in equipment that we had, bought with our hard-earned little money there over the years. God. And it was pretty devastating. And we had to ask ourselves, well, do we just buy a bunch of packages and start over? It's like, no, we've been working on these breeding lines and the stock lines, for him for 5 years before I met him. And then now collectively, that was 6 years into it. So total already 11 years we've been working on these breeding lines. And I told him, I said, I think we just need to build off of what we have. So it was a slow recovery. It took us several years. We still have never gotten back to the numbers we had then. But I attribute that partially to, I had to now split my time with my real babies, right? So I had, 2 infants and, well, 1 toddler, 1 infant. And so Mark and I would tag team. I had these wonderful delusions of grandeur, like, oh, I'll just put the baby in the hammock and the net will be hanging over and I'll be catching queens.
No.
And it hurts a little bit until they start crawling and get mobile, and then they want to, like, move around, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, I'll go in the morning, you go in the afternoon. And so we started to
divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer, yeah. And I attribute our sort of stamina at this point, our endurance, to my family, my mother and my sister. My mother's a retired educator. My sister is an early childhood educator, but both of them tolerate my beekeeping. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've like coerced them into like, just help me move a few hives tonight, or hey, just help me go give them some honey frames. Like, but so they've learned to tolerate it. But no, my mother eventually bit the bullet too, because she wanted to be near her grandkids. And so they moved up north. But yeah, they would come and stay for a couple weeks, and that way Mark and I then could go out together and get caught up. And then finally she moved up and has been, yeah, they've been a godsend because they help with watching the kids while trying to do everything. Yeah, but yeah, so we had a great run. I mean, we're still operating. I focus a little bit more on research now and community outreach projects. And Mark is still just hardcore worker bee. I mean, he really likes just, keeping bees, going and maintaining them and harvesting and doing all that whole process. And then we collaborate with our queen rearing. I really hit a point, especially after I had my son, who's now 8. So in 2011 was when he was born. Just all those years of repetitive motion of bending over for beehives, and of course, like getting a little bit heavier myself. Like my back really started to grumble. And so I realized a few years ago that I really needed to change my game. I love this industry. I want to stay with it for as long as I can, but I couldn't keep doing it the way I had been. And I had been lucky enough to apply for a few Sustainable Ag Research Education grants, SARE.org, which offers good funding for various farming endeavors. I'd been lucky enough to apply for a couple of those grants and get them, and which really kind of helped to put my breeding program on the map and to allow us to do more outreach. And I guess that's kind of how I ended up creating a little bit of a name for myself in particular. It was really because of grant objectives. I mean, they require you to share what you're doing. And so I would say, oh, well, I'm going to write an article, or, oh, I'll do a presentation. And so that's really kind of what launched that side of my outreach efforts.
That's when we first met, you were at the Oregon State Beekeepers Association conference and you gave a talk, but I was also lucky to get to spend a little bit of time with you. But I had first heard of you from Ange Roll at They Keep Bees as somebody who was a queen rearing mentor. They
are wonderful. Ange is really great. And I met Ange in 2018, I believe, at a slow food event. So it was my first time going. I had heard of the slow food program for a while, and I knew that they had a sort of biannual meeting every other year they would meet. And so I was able to apply to be a U.S. delegate, and that's where I met
You are
Ange.
just out there in the world.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that, part of it is from my Peace Corps experience. Like, I love traveling. I'm sort of a closet anthropologist at heart. I really love learning about other cultures. And the more that I got involved with beekeeping, and then especially working at Kona Queen, where I got to work with beekeepers from other countries, I just really became fascinated with, wow, beekeeping exists almost everywhere. And there's a culture to it, right? And there's traditions to it. And there's, varying levels of participation, from, honey hunting to, of course, bee having, and then to beekeeping. And then, you've got queen rearing, queen breeding, you've got research, you've got honey production, you've got pollination. And there's all these, just a myriad of facets to the industry. And being a hyperactive individual, as I mentioned, like, this is almost, I couldn't have found a more perfect fit, because we're dealing with such a dynamic industry. And I feel like I'm always learning something new. I'm really fascinated with apitherapy. That's another sort of facet to the bee-human relationship that I really am, encouraged to pursue more. And so I just got sort of that, the bug bit, so to speak, or stung in that case, where
it's really interesting to me that people that really get deep into bees, it is not always by choice that they were guided to where they are. It's like the bees have guided them, and they certainly have guided you from having ambitions to wanting to be a DJ.
Right. Well, and it's funny because that connects back to that sort of DJ thing, in that, one, I think the bees found me, and I'm forever grateful to that, I think had I stuck with DJing in the conventional sense of like being at clubs, till all hours of the morning, who knows what I would have got, other things I would have gotten myself involved in. But it's about the sound and it's about the energy, and that's really, there goes that motorcycle again. But it's about the sound and the energy. It really is, and the hives provide that for me. Their humming, their vibrations. I mean, especially for someone who's very hyperactive like myself, they really help me get in the zone. They are my therapy. They calm me down. They center me. And so in a sense, it's like they're DJing for me now, and I just haven't gotten bored with it at all.
They give you the beats.
Right. They give you beats.
Yeah, sorry, that was a bad pun.
It was good. I giggled. Having my kids actually really was what opened my eyes to the larger world. Like there's the world of bees, there's the world of bees of humans, but there's also a world that's above and beyond beekeeping, and I found that my children actually made me sane again, because I was crazy for bees. I still am crazy. But I put it in perspective, because I realized too, one, I don't want my children to hate what we do. My farm partner Mark used to say to folks who were like, "Oh, how cool, your kids get to grow up at the bee farm," and he's all, "Are you kidding me? I would not wish this on my worst enemy." And so it's funny because we involve them. In fact, after I get off talking with you, I'm taking them with me. We're going up to the farm. So because they go to school here in town, which has a little bit more amenities, we're about 20 minutes from the farm. So we used to all be at the farm. And then as my kids started getting more into school, I just like, okay, I'll get us a little base in town. Plus my mother and sister live here. And so we're going up to the farm and they're going to help me do a graft. So it's funny because my daughter's at an age now where she can really do it. Whereas before, I have photos of her being, like 4 and 5, saying she's helping me, but she's just sitting there eating honey with a grafting tool. But now she's
whatever works. Yeah. Whatever keeps them busy.
Whatever. Yeah. So yeah, no, I would love to chat more. I kind of just, gushed out who I am and where I came from.
Yeah.
But then
there's just so much more. There's so much more to you that I want to share with everybody. But I do want our listeners to know that you and I do have a couple things in common. I'm also a New Mexico native.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Did I know that? Did you tell me that? I forgot.
Well, the morning that you and I got to hang out at the conference was the morning after the banquet the night before, and there was some serious drinking happening the night before, and I think everybody was green the next morning and experiencing memory problems and all of that. But yeah, I'm a New Mexico native, and I had a little spot on National Geographic too. So those are two cool little things that we have in common.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, now it's coming back to me. I'm like, oh, that's right. Because you were, okay, remind me which town you grew up in, or you were born.
Albuquerque.
Yeah. We have the tricultural influence, So
well, and I remember growing up and like going to Santa Fe and going to the churches that they have there and seeing like the Navajo Indians set up with their handmade jewelry and all of the silver and the turquoise. Yeah. The roasting chilies.
Right.
Oh man, that's one smell.
What brings me home.
That's
what brings me back.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a company here in Portland that roasts New Mexico chilies, and they go around to the different, New Seasons markets, and they'll be like, okay, we're going to be at this location this day. So you can go and buy fresh roasted Hatch green chilies.
Wow. Well, that goes to show how deep the addiction is. It's basically worldwide. Once you have it, it's hard to walk away. Yeah, my farm partner Mark, when he, of course, coming from Michigan, where it's like black pepper is spicy, he was like, we went somewhere when he first got here, and to get breakfast, and I asked for a side of green chili, and he was like, oh, okay, now that's ridiculous. On your eggs for breakfast?
Oh, yes.
And forward a few years, and now he's like, can I get an extra side of chili? Like, so it totally grew on him for sure. But.
Yeah. Melanie,
Well, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your flexibility.
Oh,
and
totally.
Yeah, anytime you want to chat some more, I mean, there's a current project I'm working on, which is kind of metamorphosized over the past just month, given the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's something else. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a few other things I could talk more even on, just like breeding philosophies.
Yeah,
And,
I would love to do an episode about genetics, because I think that for a lot of backyard beekeepers who want to take it to the next level, that's
right?
sort of the direction that they want to go in, because everybody's waking up to the fact that we can't keep sustaining this system where we're using bees from out of state in our areas, because it's just another challenge for them.
Right. Well, and it's tough because, I mean, we're all well intentioned and we want to have our bees. Well, many of us want to have our bees as natural as possible to nurture that natural process. And I definitely fall in that camp. And so when you have, you don't have a lot of local production, but you have a lot of importation, a lot of those bees, do have traces of quality characteristics. But if they're from high production zones and exactly that sort of this factory farming situation where it's really about numbers, these bees are heavily medicated because that's how they keep them going. And so then they get transported to these other places with very well-intentioned people, and they just go cold turkey on them.
Yeah.
And, they say, well, I'm just going to be totally natural. And it's like, well, that would be great if those bees were capable of doing that on their own. It's almost like we have to wean them off and then find those ones that adapt and survive, and then work from those gems to rebuild the local.
And for beekeepers who want to get to that point, like I want to be treatment free, but it takes time, and it takes finding the bees with the genetics that can handle it, and then just use those ones to make more beehives.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's all interconnected. I often tell people another cliche, but it's, it takes a community to raise bees.
Yeah.
Because I actually don't own any land, so I rely on the hive hosters, the people who are hosting, what they're spraying or not spraying, what they're watering or not watering. And then the fact that the bees fly, above and beyond their own yard. I mean, then you've got a whole community that doesn't realize the sort of impressions or impact that, or the roles that they're playing in that. And so it really is, that's really what kind of encourages my interest in doing outreach, because not only do I like sharing, but I like learning. And the more I learn, the more I see how many more pieces are involved, and not that I know how to put them all together, but I find it very humbling for me. So for me, it's like, okay, well, I feel like I can support in this way or in this manner, or support other people who are then doing something else in their manner and in that way. And I think that's what's so much fun about beekeeping. You can play with everybody if they want to play.
Oh, this has been the highlight of my week.
Aww.
So thank you for our time today.
You're very welcome.
To learn more about Melanie and her work, visit her online at ziaqueenbees.com. Thank you all for listening. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, may the buzz be with you. Beekeeper Confidential is a Waggleworks production and is written and produced by Mandy Shaw.